I never thought a quiet airport lounge would become the place that shattered everything I believed about family. My name is Elena Foster, and for most of my life, I played the perfect daughter-obedient, composed, invisible. But on that day, while we were supposedly headed to South Africa for a family trip, I watched my father lean down, pat Grandpa's shoulder, and say, "Just sit here. We'll go check in and come right back." They walked away, calm, certain, but something didn't sit right. Minutes passed, then 20, then 30, and that's when it hit me. They weren't coming back. My grandfather, confused, frail, already fading into the fog of Alzheimer's, was being abandoned right there in the middle of the terminal, left like luggage nobody claimed. I didn't think. I just ran, and what I saw when I found him changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of home. Growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, my life looked perfect from the outside. Two-story house with white shutters, freshly cut lawn. My dad, Dr. Leonard Foster, was a respected cardiologist who liked his shirts crisp and his children quieter than the machines in his hospital wing. My mother, Patricia, stayed home, though not to nurture. She hosted fundraisers, baked for school galas, and reminded Yus often that presentation is everything. I was their firstborn, the responsible one. The straight-A student with perfectly combed hair and piano competition ribbons hung above her bed like battle medals. Every family photo showed us smiling. But no one noticed how I always folded my hands too tightly, as if bracing for something. In our house, love wasn't spoken. It was measured, in achievement, in silence, in how well you played along. But Grandpa William? He was different. He was the only one who ever told me, "You don't need to earn love, Elena. Just be." Every Sunday when I was a child, he'd take me to the park while my parents were at their social club. We'd feed ducks and read books under the elm tree by the lake. He called me Laney, a nickname no one else was allowed to use. I still remember his hands scarred from years as a high school shop teacher, but always steady when he turned the pages of The Wind in the Willows for me. As I got older, the visits grew fewer. Dad said Grandpa was getting slower and confused. Eventually, those Sundays stopped altogether. He was moved to the guest room upstairs, out of sight, out of the way. But I would sneak up there sometimes, especially during high school finals, when the pressure of perfection made me feel like I was suffocating. Grandpa never asked about grades. He just smiled and said, "Tell me something beautiful you saw today." And I always had something. He remembered the small things, even when he started forgetting bigger ones. At first, it was harmless, calling me Laney 3 times in a row as if he was surprised I was still there. Then he'd get stuck in stories from the past, repeating the same line like it was new. My dad grew annoyed. My mom started speaking about him in the past tense while he was still in the room. But to me, he was still Grandpa, still the man who taught me how to look at the sky and see more than weather. And that's why when Dad said we were all going on a trip together to make memories before things got worse, I wanted to believe him, even when something inside me whispered, "No one makes memories by leaving someone behind." Before the forgetting began, Grandpa was the one person who remembered everything that mattered. He remembered that I hated chocolate milk, but loved strawberry. He remembered my favorite stories, the way I hummed when I was nervous, and the fact that my middle name May was after his mother, not my mom's, no matter how many times she tried to claim otherwise. He never forgot me. Even when Alzheimer's began eroding his sense of time and place, even when he mixed up names and dates, somehow he still looked at me like I was home. The first time he forgot where he was, I was 16. I found him standing in the driveway in slippers, clutching a watering can. It was February, snow everywhere. He thought he was back in Alabama, tending roses with Grandma before she died. When I gently took his hand, he blinked and said, "Laney, am I dreaming?" I smiled through the sting in my chest. "No, Grandpa, you're just remembering." My parents treated it like a phase. They whispered words like facility and nursing wing late at night. But I couldn't bear the thought of him alone, among strangers who wouldn't know that he hummed old jazz tunes when anxious, or that he always stirred his tea 3 times before sipping. So I became the one who sat beside him in the evenings, reading aloud from the books he once read to me: The Secret Garden, Of Mice and Men, Charlotte's Web. He couldn't always follow, but sometimes his eyes lit up like he'd just opened a door that used to be locked. Those moments were rare and precious, but they became rarer. One summer afternoon, we were sitting in the backyard under the big maple tree. I had just graduated high school. My parents were hosting a party inside string lights, charcuterie boards, the works, but I had slipped away. I didn't want champagne. I wanted Grandpa. He looked at me that day, eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks, and said, "Lainey, when they stop seeing me, promise me you won't." I froze. "I could never stop seeing you." He nodded, placing a hand over mine. "Then, when the time comes, you'll know what to do." I didn't know what he meant. Not then. But those words lodged themselves inside me like a tiny ember, waiting for the day I'd need to remember them. And that day came, at the airport. After my first year of college, everything at home felt rearranged. The guest room where Grandpa stayed was suddenly locked during the day. Mom said it was for his safety. Dad said he needed rest. But I noticed how the hallway stayed eerily quiet now. How they no longer invited him downstairs for dinner. How they stopped correcting people when they assumed Grandpa didn't live with us anymore. He was fading from the family like an old photograph left in sunlight. I pushed back in the only ways I could. I left notes for Grandpa on his nightstand. Snuck him his favorite lemon cookies from the bakery near campus. Sat beside him for long stretches, even if he just stared at the window and called me Rose, his late sister's name. But what hurt most wasn't his forgetting. It was theirs. One afternoon, I overheard my dad on the phone. "Yes, I know the lawyer said she'll need to co-sign, but she's just a kid. We'll handle it." She. He was talking about me. I waited until he left the room, then tiptoed in and peeked at the papers on the counter. Medical directives. Estate planning. They weren't just preparing for Grandpa's decline, they were preparing to transfer everything away from him. And me. That night, I confronted them. "He still knows me," I said, voice tight. "He still smiles when I read to him. He still laughs when I burn toast. He's still here." Mom didn't look up from folding laundry. "Elena, you're too emotional. You've always been too attached." Dad sighed. "You think love is enough? It's not. We're doing what's responsible." "Responsible?" I snapped. "You mean convenient?" That earned me silence, followed by cold. From then on, they excluded me from every conversation about Grandpa's care. I came home from campus one weekend to find that they'd moved his books, thrown out his slippers, replaced the tea kettle he loved. Minimalism, Mom said brightly. But to me, it felt like erasure. Then came the announcement. "We're going to South Africa," Dad said at dinner one evening. "A full family trip, one last memory together." His smile was too wide, his eyes too careful. I looked at Grandpa, sitting quietly beside me, fingers tapping an invisible rhythm on the table. He didn't seem to register the conversation, but when I leaned close and whispered, "You want to go on an adventure?" he looked at me and winked. It was small, but it was him. And so I said yes to the trip. Not because I believed them, but because something told me this wasn't just a vacation, it was a test. And I needed to be close just in case they failed it. We left for the airport just before sunrise. The sky was still bleeding orange, and the air smelled faintly of dew and fuel as we loaded the car. Grandpa wore his navy cardigan, his travel sweater. He used to call it buttoned wrong and sleeves too long. He clutched a framed photo of Grandma in one hand and my wrist in the other. Dad kept checking his watch. Mom kept checking her reflection. I kept checking Grandpa's eyes, watching for signs that he was with us. In the back seat, I whispered, "Are you excited, Grandpa?" He didn't answer, just stared out the window and hummed something. I almost recognized, maybe an old military tune, maybe a lullaby. I squeezed his hand. We're going somewhere warm. Elephants, remember? He looked at me then and said softly, "You'll make a fine teacher one day, Rose." I didn't correct him. He always called me Rose when he was scared. At the airport, the lines were long, the atmosphere buzzing with noise and fluorescent light. Mom pulled me aside. "Elena, go get coffee for your father and me. Something strong." I looked at Grandpa. "What about him?" "He's fine," she said, already walking away. "We'll be right back." Dad led Grandpa to a chair in the quietest corner of the terminal, a row of seats, near a frosted window looking out at the tarmac. Grandpa sat obediently, still holding the photo of Grandma. My father leaned over him and said, clearly and slowly, "Just sit here. We'll go check in and come right back." The words echoed in my head like a stone dropped down a well. I stood frozen, coffee order half formed in my mouth. They walked off. My parents toward the departure gate, calm, confident, not once looking back. And something felt wrong. I watched the back of their heads until they disappeared around the bend. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Grandpa was still there, still waiting, still tracing the edge of the photo frame with his thumb. 15 minutes. My heart pounded. 20. Something cold settled in my gut. I approached the check-in kiosk. "Hisori, has the Foster party already checked in for flight?" The woman behind the desk typed. "Yes, checked in and cleared." My breath caught. "All of them?" She nodded, then added, "Boarding should begin in about 20 minutes." I backed away, numb. They weren't coming back. They had no intention of ever coming back. 100 feet away, my grandfather sat, alone, in a sea of strangers. He didn't know what was happening, didn't know where he was. He only knew they'd said, "Wait for us." And so he waited. Because that's what loyal people do. I started walking, then running, pushing through the crowds. My throat tightened. I had always believed betrayal would be loud. Slammed doors, screamed words. But betrayal, I learned, is quiet. It walks away calmly while you're still smiling. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just moved. The clatter of luggage wheels and boarding calls faded into static as I sprinted back toward the quiet corner where Grandpa sat. I saw him there still in the same chair, shoulders slouched, eyes scanning the crowd like a child waiting for a parent who'd forgotten them. "Grandpa," I gasped, dropping to my knees in front of him. "It's me, it's Elena." His eyes flickered with recognition, then confusion. "Rose?" he whispered, voice dry. "It's okay," I said, holding his hands, which had gone cold. "I'm here. You're not alone." He looked around, bewildered. "Where did your father go? He said he'd come right back. Am I supposed to go somewhere?" My throat tightened. "No, you're supposed to stay with me, that's all." He gripped my hands tighter, trembling. I was so scared, Lainey, too didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream. Not at him. At the people who had walked away so easily, who had packed their passports and printed boarding passes and made peace with abandoning the man who once carried them on his shoulders, who taught them how to fish, who stayed up when they had nightmares and paid for their first cars. I stood and pulled him up gently. "Come on, Grandpa, we're leaving." He hesitated, looking down the terminal toward the gates. "Aren't we going on a trip?" "Yes," I said, wrapping his scarf around his neck, "but not the one they planned." As we walked toward the exit, I heard my name. "Elena." I turned. Mom stood by the escalator, her heels clacking against the tile, mascara smudged, phone still in hand. Dad was behind her, stiff, silent. "Elena, get back here. Now." I tightened my grip on Grandpa's hand. "He doesn't even know where he is," Mom snapped, voice rising. "He needs professional care. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I'm not leaving him like luggage in a waiting room." Dad finally spoke, his voice low, sharp. "You're making a scene. Think about how this looks." "How it looks?" I laughed bitterly. He's your father. They froze. For a moment, we all stood in silence, the buzz of the terminal pressing in. Then I said it. You left him. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just said it like a verdict. Mom's lips parted, but no words came. I stepped back. We're done here. Elena, if you walk away, Dad began. But I did. I walked. Out of the terminal, into the cold morning light, my coat barely wrapped around both of us. I hailed the first cab I saw and helped Grandpa in, his hands still shaking. We drove for miles in silence, the airport shrinking behind us like a bad dream. Only when we reached the bus station did I exhale. Where are we going? Grandpa asked gently, eyes cloudy. I took out my phone, scrolled through my messages, found the contact I'd saved weeks ago, the one I never thought I'd use. June Harmon. My grandfather's younger sister. My great-aunt. The only person in our family who still sent birthday cards with handwritten notes. She lived on a small property in Kansas and had called me a few months back, worried about Grandpa. If anything ever happens, Elena, you call me, she'd said. Don't let them tuck him away. I called. She answered on the second ring. June, it's Elena. Grandpa needs you, we need you. Her voice broke. Tell me where you are. I'll be waiting. I bought 2 bus tickets for the next departure. The station was nearly empty. I helped Grandpa into a seat, wrapped him in my scarf, and rested his head on my shoulder. He fell asleep before the engine rumbled to life. We rode into the sunrise, past fields and telephone poles and sleepy towns. I watched the landscape change, but I didn't feel lost. Not anymore. We were going somewhere we'd be seen. Somewhere we'd belong. For the first time in my life, I wasn't following my parents. I was choosing. And that choice, though terrifying, felt like coming home. The bus pulled into the tiny station in Holton, Kansas just after noon. It was quiet, almost too quiet after the blur of terminals and engines, but I welcomed the stillness. Standing on the platform was a small, sturdy woman in a denim jacket, silver hair pulled back, holding a cardboard sign that read, William plus Alina in shaky black marker. June Harmon. She dropped the sign the moment she saw us. Oh, Billy! She gasped, rushing forward. Grandpa blinked at her, then smiled, more recognition than I expected. Junebug? He said weakly. She laughed through tears. Still remember that, huh? He reached for her hand. You got old. And you didn't, she teased, wrapping him in a hug that made something in me loosen. For the first time in days, I let go of the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. We drove down 2-lane roads flanked by open fields. Her house sat at the edge of town, a modest 2-bedroom with chipping white paint and a wide porch that looked like it had seen decades of stories. There was no formal plan, no intake forms, no talk of burden. Just warm soup, clean sheets, and the kind of silence that wraps around you, like a quilt knot, the cold kind I knew from home. That first night, I sat on the porch while Grandpa napped inside. June brought out 2 mugs of tea and sat beside me, her joints creaking like the old rocking chair. You did the right thing, she said quietly. Even if they don't see it now, especially if they don't. I nodded, though I hadn't even told her everything. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, she added. This house may be small, but it has space for people who see each other. I didn't cry. I just stared at the stars. And for the first time, I felt like they were staring back, not through me. Over the next few weeks, I helped with whatever I could. Grocery runs, cooking, laundry. I took Grandpa for slow walks around the block when the weather was nice. He didn't always know where we were, but he always held my hand. Sometimes he'd call me Rose, other times, Lainey. And every now and then, rare, fleeting, he'd look at me with clear eyes and say, Elena. Those moments felt like gold dust, proof that something of him still lived beneath the fog. At night, I started journaling, not for school, not for therapy, just to remember. I wrote down things Grandpa said, things June cooked, things I never wanted to forget. Because for once, forgetting wasn't just his fear, it was mine too. And I was finally in a place where remembering was allowed. By spring, the rhythm of life in Holton had settled around me like a second skin. Each morning, I'd wake before the sun, help June make oatmeal, and sit with Grandpa as he slowly stirred his spoon, sometimes forgetting what to do next. I'd remind him gently, no frustration, no shame. And on the good days, he'd hum while he ate. Sometimes even tell a half-finished story about fishing with his brothers, or the time he dropped his wedding ring in a loaf of bread and never told Grandma. June started calling us the quiet trio. We didn't need much noise, just presence. I enrolled in a part-time nursing assistant course at the local community college, not because I planned it, but because something in me had shifted like a compass finally pointing north. Caring for Grandpa no longer felt like sacrifice. It felt like inheritance. One afternoon, June found me in the kitchen poring over homework about dementia patient care. She set down a plate of cornbread and said, "You know, I think you were always meant for this." I shook my head. "I'm not strong enough. I cry too easily. I get overwhelmed." She smiled. "And yet, here you are." When my clinical rotation began, I started visiting the local memory care unit. Most of the residents didn't know who I was, but when I read aloud, their eyes softened. When I brought Grandpa's old radio and played his favorite jazz station, some of them tapped their fingers to the beat. One woman, Margie, thought I was her daughter every time I walked in. I never corrected her. I just sat and listened as she told the same story about her wedding day in 1952. Each retelling felt like a thread from a tapestry she was afraid would unravel. It made me think of Grandpa. Even as his memory faded, he still felt. He still reached for my hand, still flinched at loud noises, still smiled at birdsong. And maybe that's the part no one teaches you in textbooks, that memory isn't always in facts, it's in feeling. One day, as I wheeled Grandpa into the backyard, he turned to me, unexpectedly lucid. "You're doing good, Lainey," he said, eyes bright. "Real good." I knelt beside him. "I wish I could have done more." He shook his head slowly. "You did the one thing that mattered. You stayed." That night, I printed the photo we took together at the bus station, him smiling, bundled in my scarf, eyes closed in the sun. I placed it beside my bed. Not because he would remember, but because I would. Because this chapter of my life, born from pain and defiance, had become something bigger. Not an escape. A homecoming. The morning Grandpa passed, the house was silent. I found him in his chair by the window, hands resting on a worn blanket, the radio playing soft jazz in the background. His framed photo of Grandma was still on the table beside him. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful, like he'd just dozed off mid-story. I didn't cry at first. I just sat beside him, held his hand, and whispered, "You can rest now. I'll remember the rest for you." We buried him under the oak tree behind June's house, his favorite spot. The ceremony was small, just June, a few neighbors, and me. I didn't invite my parents, not out of anger. Out of clarity. They hadn't been part of his final chapter. They didn't earn a place in its closing. But a week later, I went back to Omaha. I needed to return, not for them, but for me. I rang the doorbell of the house I grew up in. It looked smaller somehow, like a stage after the curtains close. Mom opened the door, eyes wide. "Elena?" She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dad stood behind her, arms crossed, but not defiant, just tired. "I heard," she said softly, "about your grandfather." I nodded. "He passed peacefully, with people who loved him." She looked down, hands wringing. "We didn't mean to." "You did," I interrupted gently. "You meant to leave him, at the airport, and you would have done the same to me if I hadn't followed your script." Dad stepped forward. "He didn't remember you most days. It wasn't personal. It was never about what he remembered," I said. "It was about what I wouldn't forget." I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope June had handed me the day before. Grandpa's revised will, a quiet letter tucked inside, his life savings, his pension, and a note that read, To Elena? You were the only one who stayed. My love belongs with you. Keep remembering. Grandpa. I handed it to them without a word. Their expressions shifted: shock, then guilt, then something more complicated. I'm not here to fight, I said. Just to let you know that I'm okay, and that he was too. I turned to leave, but Mom grabbed my wrist. Elena, will you come home? I looked her in the eyes, really looked, and for the first time I saw not cruelty but emptiness. A woman who'd built a life around control and now stood in its hollow center. I am home, I said. In Holton. With the people who remembered me before I had to earn it. Back in Kansas, I returned to my studies, my patience, and the porch where Grandpa once sat. I opened a reading circle for children and seniors. I kept the photo of him and me on the wall beside my nursing certificate. And every night, I whispered to the stars, I didn't let go. Because in choosing him, I chose myself. And that will always be enough.